I serve as a policy associate for the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States. I work primarily on poverty and economic empowerment, labor issues, immigration policy, and criminal and juvenile justice reform. So we have a great panel today featuring gifted advocates from across the religious spectrum, all talking about an issue of national shame, child poverty. I've heard a colleague say once before that every birth, every new child, is a reminder of God's faith in humanity, God's faith in our world. In other words, every child represents a new and living chance to reshape the world to the idea million children live in poverty. These children, these kids, match in size the populations of Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Maine, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Vermont, and West Virginia combined. Tellingly, child poverty also varies considerably by race. 39% of African American children, 37% of American Indian children, and 33% of Hispanic kids live in poverty. Now compare that to just 14% of white kids. Clearly more work must be done to address the disproportionate impact of poverty on people of color. However, these figures should come as no surprise. Today, the minimum wage is worth less in real terms than it was in 1968. Overall, since 1980, wages for the bottom 70% of all workers have only grown by 11% on average, whereas the top 5% saw their wages increase by over 40%. As a result, so many families and kids rely on food assistance programs like SNAP, or refunds from their earned income tax credit, or housing subsidies just to get by. But the causes of child poverty don't stop there. Our criminal justice system is the largest in the world. The United States is home to 25% of the world's prisoners, yet home to only 5% of the world's population. The majority of inmates are serving sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. More than half of these inmates are parents of minor children. Today, 1 out of every 25 kids has a parent in prison. The PBS classic Sesame Street has aired an episode on incarceration to help kids grapple with this now all too common reality. Our immigration enforcement machine deports about 1,100 people every single day. 16.6 million people live in mixed status families, often with U.S. citizen kids, making deportations especially devastating for children. Clearly, something must be done to address this tragic reality of child poverty. In addition to providing more context on some of the issues I just spoke about, our panelists are going to offer some policy solutions that can help address this major problem. Additionally, we'll provide each of you with some concrete ways to engage your communities in advocacy with your elected officials on this important issue. But first, we'll hear from Christine Melendez-Ashley. Christine is a senior domestic policy analyst at Bread for the World, a collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger at home and abroad. Christine joined Bread for the World in July 2009 and provides organizational leadership on nutrition assistance and child nutrition issues affecting hungry and poor people in the United States by developing and implementing policy and legislative strategy. She previously worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative staff assistant and systems administrator for Rep. Randy Forbes, and she has received a BA in political science from Wheaton College. After Christine, we'll hear from Shannon Scully. And Shannon is the policy and research analyst for Catholic Charities USA. Her work focuses on issues of poverty related to affordable housing, health, and vulnerable populations such as immigrants, refugees, children, and the aging. Prior to working at Catholic Charities USA, she spent several years working in case management and direct services. Shannon holds a bachelor's degree from the College of St. Benedict and a master's in public policy from American University here in Washington, D.C. Melanie Feynman is an Eisendrath legislative assistant at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, the Union for Reform Judaism's Washington, D.C. office. At the RAC, Melanie's portfolio focuses on issues of economic justice, including worker justice, minimum wage, and paid sick days. Melanie received a bachelor's degree from Brown University. And finally, we'll hear from Colin, who currently works at Network. He directs their education trainings, curriculum, film, and other media content, and informs and engages their Spirit-filled network and the overall general public. Colin's background in politics, media, and education has involved organizing diverse coalitions in India, calling for better bicycle infrastructure, producing a film promoting urban chicken raising in the U.S., and educating Muslim communities about environmental conservation in Islam through Washington, D.C.-based Green Muslims. Colin received his master's degree of international public affairs from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Bachelor of Arts in political science from the George Washington. So we'll have time for question and answers at the end of the final presentation, and we'll also have a couple opportunities for you to engage in some advocacy today if you so choose, and also opportunities to take back to your communities. But first, let's hear from Christine.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit briefly about specifically child hunger, which is really a big aspect and one of those kind of symptoms of child poverty, but something that is really easy to do something about. So I'll just start with an overview of the problem. So child hunger, are the slides working up there right now?
They're up.
They're up, okay. Because what I'm seeing is not the slides that, the right slides, but okay. So child hunger, 1 in 5 kids live at risk of hunger. That's nearly 16 million kids. And kids who live at risk of hunger, I mean, this has devastating consequences. Children who experience hunger have overall poorer health and they're ill-equipped to learn. Even short-term episodes of hunger can cause lasting damage to a child's cognitive and social development. They're more likely to be sick or get hospitalized. They're more likely to get poorer grades. And studies really show that kids who get breakfast in particular have higher math test scores and are more likely to graduate high school. So when you look at a number like 1 in 5 or nearly 16 million kids at risk of hunger, that's has some devastating long-term consequences for hunger and poverty. And so but there is something that we can do about it. So what is in place to help make sure kids have enough food to eat? If you look at the next slide on child nutrition programs, our federal government funds a number of programs that help kids get the meals that they need regardless of where they are. So school meals, so school breakfast, school lunch, summer food, the Child Adult Care Food Program, WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children's Program. You know, our country's made a commitment to meet kids where they are and make sure that they're getting the food that they need to learn and grow. So, of course, lunch and breakfast programs offer meals while kids are at school. And if you're a low-income kid, you get a free or reduced-price meal. During the summer, those same kids are eligible to receive meals through community groups or schools or churches that serve meals during the summer months. Additionally, you know, there's child care, daycare programs, making sure that kids who are younger are getting those meals, and also WIC is a really important anti-hunger and public health program that makes sure that you know, from pregnancy all the way up through age 5, kids are getting the nutritious foods that they need to grow, because that really is such a critical time of development. But not listed on the child nutrition program slide is actually our country's largest anti-hunger program, and that's SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance program, or which is formerly food stamps. And the reality is that nearly half of SNAP participants are children. So a lot of times when we talk about child nutrition programs and child hunger, we focus a lot on those, you know, school meal programs and those types of programs. But really, SNAP is another really large anti-hunger program for children that impacts you know, more than 21 million kids in this country. You know, without these programs, I really believe that more children would be living at risk of hunger. But we can still do more. If you look at the slide on your screen here, for every 7 low-income kids that get a lunch at school, only 4 get breakfast, and only 1 gets meals during the summer. That's a pretty big gap, and we can certainly be doing a better job of ensuring that kids have access to the breakfasts and summer meals that they're eligible for, because these kids who are missing meals are kids who qualify and are just have trouble accessing the program. So if we look at the next slide, Bread for the World this year is looking to protect and improve child nutrition programs. Our primary goal in our campaign this year, which we call our offering of letters, is we're looking for no cuts or harmful policy changes. We want to improve access to all of the child nutrition programs, and we really don't want to see any kind of cuts to SNAP or other safety net programs in that process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the political landscape next, and about why that's such an important part of our goal. So if you look at the next slide, there's a lot going on in Congress right now that is going to impact not just these vital anti-hunger programs, but probably all of the issues that we're going to hear about today. We've got a Republican House and Senate. So both chambers now are controlled by the same party. We've got new leadership of the two committees that have jurisdiction over child nutrition programs and SNAP. And so, a lot of members aren't very familiar with the programs, or they are looking to find savings in all of those programs. And the last piece is the one that we're actually right in the middle of right now, which is the 2016 budget process. That is really setting the stage for what this Congress's priorities are. And through that process, their budgets that they've proposed have shown that 69% of all of their budget savings are coming from programs that impact low-income people. So that just really, I think, is an indicator of where this Congress's priorities are and why our voices are so important. In fact, they're more important now, more now than ever, I think. So if you look at the next slide, these are just some talking points and work that we're doing, and specifically to child nutrition programs. First, we want Congress to continue strong investments in the child nutrition programs. They work. They're making sure kids aren't going hungry, and we need to continue those investments. The second is that they could do a better job of reaching children, and so we want to make sure that we improve access, particularly during the summer and after school times. And the third is, we really want Congress to oppose cuts to safety net programs like SNAP or Medicaid or any of the other low-income safety net programs. So that's really the big three things that at Bread for the World we're asking Congress for this year. So I know questions, we have time after all the presentations, so if you have questions, write them down now. But for now, I'll stop there and turn it over to Shannon for her presentation.
Before we turn it over to Shannon, I just want to apologize for some technical difficulties we've been having. We're still working it out, but at least you have audio, and I think you can see some of the slides now. So now on to Shannon.
Great, thank you. So I just want to first kind of give you a picture of kind of the national scope of the issue of children and homelessness. It's kind of a broad issue, and what I'm really going to try to focus on today for you is the impact that the affordable housing crisis in the United States really has on children and youth, and outcomes and impact. So to give you just some top-line statistics, these numbers are coming from a study that's done by the Department of Housing and Urban Development every year. They call it their point-in-time count, and it's really their best estimate on finding information about the homeless population in the United States. So on a single night in January in 2014, which are the most recent numbers, 578,424 people were homeless on that night. 23% of these people were children under the age of 18, and a little over 6,000 were unaccompanied homeless children and youth under the age of 18. So this kind of gives you an idea of those who are, and these are people who are living in both sheltered and unsheltered locations. Sheltered locations really kind of meaning they're in some kind of a program. But these are really big numbers talking about children. To just give you a better idea, 1 in 45 children in America are going to experience homelessness at some point during the year. And these are really only estimates, and they don't really capture another portion of homelessness, or housing insecurity as we sometimes call it, which is more of this hidden homelessness. Housing insecurity kind of talks about those who are those who are living in overcrowded housing or apartments, living with other families, are moving around frequently, and these situations generally result from job loss, escaping domestic violence situations, or just simply a lack of affordable housing. Like I said, a lot of the housing insecurity just is about the supply of affordable housing in America. To give you a more accurate number, a report recently by the Children's Health Watch estimated that almost 40% of families in America are housing insecure. So if we want to go on to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit about what does affordable housing mean for people. And so while housing insecurity, is tied to a lot of things, again, it's really tied to the amount of affordable housing in the United States. And there really isn't a lot of that available. So the estimates by HUD are that 12 million U.S. households spend more than 50% of their annual income on housing. And in nowhere in the United States can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom rental unit at the market rate. So this just kind of gives you a really good sense of what's out there for families in terms of low and extremely low-income families and what they can afford. So if we want to move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the negative effects of and I'm putting in quotations, affordable housing, because while we talk about affordable housing, it really, again, is based on those numbers we talked about before, really is not affordable for most people, most really working families in the United States. So they can have some negative effects on children. The correlation, it's more of a correlation between housing and some of these effects. There tends to be a stronger correlation between things such as parents' income and food and education access. However, housing also plays a factor into this. And so housing's been found to have a link to poor cognitive development in children, lower reading and math scores have shown up in the studies. Inadequate housing in terms of the quality of housing can have effects on poor physical health. Poor housing conditions have been strongly tied to issues in terms of like asthma for small children, and can have physical health implications throughout their lives. Children have also been found to have emotional and behavioral problems, as well as just a lot of negative long-term outcomes in terms of their access to education based on where they're living. Their access to opportunities for jobs are also really tied to the location of housing. So if we want to go to the next slide. So policies, in terms of kind of policies that we want to focus on, or when you're talking to those people in, whether it's at the federal, state, or really the local level, is we want to focus kind of on a couple of different areas. There's definitely the quality aspect, ensuring that families have access to quality, clean, and safe housing. Focusing on the cost, and then again, location. I would highlight that the most is a key aspect for children. So in terms of quality, again, ensuring that HUD has quality standards when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to the voucher program, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And so really making sure that at the local level, these standards are being implemented and they're being checked on. Increasing access to various housing programs that I'll highlight in the next slide is also going to assist with this, because when families aren't unable to access this, especially families who are undocumented or who are immigrants and are undocumented, they're going to they often end up living in situations where the housing is not as quality, but it is someplace in which they can afford based on their monthly income. The cost of housing is also definitely important. There's been some recent studies that have looked at that the cost of, the amount that family is spending on housing is equal to greater spending on child enrichment programs. So 30% is really important, a really important kind of percent of a family's monthly income that they should be spending on housing. The government uses this, HUD uses this kind of as a marker, but some of the research has really started to look into this, and they find that anywhere, staying around that 30%, families are going to spend somewhere around $125 extra on child enrichment programming. And so what we know about this is that this is really going to help children develop. So this is something that should be taken in consideration as we look at affordable housing programs. And then additionally, just location, location, location. Generally, where affordable housing is located for families, it's also not generally in proximity and access to schools, quality schools, job opportunities for parents to increase their income. So really looking at where are we putting affordable housing, because if we're able to put them in what a lot of researchers and policy people talk about, and higher opportunity zones, places where there's better schools, places where there's better jobs for their parents, giving people this kind of access is going to really be able to improve some of their outcomes. So if we want to go to the next slide, just some policy pieces here that you can kind of think about. Within the HUD budget, ensuring that we have enough funding for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Section 8 housing, and the low-income housing tax credits. What all these are going to do are, one, they're going to provide families with access to better quality housing and more affordable housing. And then low-income housing tax credit is just going to help low-income housing developers access the funds necessary to build low-income housing and affordable housing for families. So ensuring that those all have accurate, have good levels in the HUD budget. The National Housing Trust Fund is another thing to focus on. That was created by Congress in 2008, signed into law under President Bush. It has not been funded because the fund was essentially created to receive money outside of the annual appropriations process, so that we were going to have these monies, and it wasn't going to be up to the discretion of Congress to how much it was going to get. So a percentage of funds from the revenue from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac could go into this fund, or was supposed to go into this fund. And recently, a bar was lifted because the two companies are now making a profit. And so as of January 2016, we should be seeing funds flowing into the National Housing Trust Fund, which would essentially provide billions of dollars to create and to repair low-income housing for families. And so this would provide us with more quality, affordable housing for families. Congress is trying to right now block that from being funded. And so ensuring that when you talk to members of Congress or you're advocating on these issues, really advocating that they allow the National Housing Trust Fund and they allow that to capitalize and allow that to move forward as it was intended to in the original law. I'm going to skip down to one point to talk about the McKinney-Vento Act. A lot of the money in this programming allows for things like rapid housing and for the homeless population. So it's important that those get funded. And then back up to the next point, just to really quickly cover inclusionary zoning without getting too much in detail. This is really something that can happen at the local level, looking at where we're placing affordable housing and low-income housing, and looking at what are the zoning policies within your community that happen at the state and local level, and does that allow for affordable housing to be created in that location. And so that's really important in terms of communities cities not barring low-income families from being active members of their community and being able to live in their community where they have better opportunities. So those are just some kind of some thoughts right there in terms of housing and children, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. So again, my name is Melanie, and I'm a legislative assistant at the Religious Action Center, focusing on issues of economic justice. And today I'm so happy to be here to get to talk about worker justice, specifically the minimum wage and paid sick days. So as Matt mentioned earlier, child poverty is a huge issue in this country right now. There are too many children who are poor and extremely poor, and the number of poor children is greater than the combined populations of Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Maine, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Whoa, that's a mouthful, and that's a lot. And if there's a single common theme running through our traditions, it's that of social justice. And our traditions demand that we speak up, judge righteously, and champion the poor and the needy. And we must do that. And two ways through which we can think about doing that are through discussing our minimum wage and discussing the lack of paid sick days at the moment. So what is the minimum wage? The minimum wage is the absolute minimum amount that a worker can earn per hour. And there are different levels for this, but one level is the federal minimum wage, which is the current minimum amount that any hourly worker in this country, excluding tipped workers, can earn. And the current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, which translates to a little over $15,000 per year for a full-time year-round worker. This is well below the poverty line. And when the federal minimum wage was signed into law in 1938 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this is nearly a third of its purchasing power since its peak in the 1960s. Oh, can you hear me? Oh. Okay. Additionally, the minimum wage currently isn't indexed, which means that the minimum wage currently will be $7.25 indefinitely, even as the cost of living changes or as the median amount that a worker earns changes. That's going to be our minimum wage indefinitely, unless if we do something about it. And when thinking about this, we also need to think about what a living wage is. Even, I mentioned the federal minimum wage, but some states also have their own minimum wages, which are, in some cases, higher than the current federal minimum wage, or even not by enough. But even in states with a higher minimum wage, there's still an inadequacy to support a family of any size. A living wage takes into account the cost of essentials, like housing, food, childcare, transportation, and healthcare in different regions of the country and different family sizes, to estimate the income required for families to meet basic needs at a minimally adequate level. And a minimum wage is not necessarily the same as a living wage. And we need to ask ourselves if our current wage is enough to support families and provide them with what they need. Without a living wage, families are harmed. And low-wage work is very linked to child poverty. Just because someone is in the workforce, this does not mean that they are making enough money to live or to provide for their family. Most children are growing up in homes with both parents working or with single parents working. 2 out of every 3 children that are poor have a parent in the workforce. And 1 out of every 3 of those children has a parent working full-time year-round, but they're still experiencing poverty. Additionally, mothers are the breadwinners or co-breadwinners in 2/3 of American families, and close to 1/3 of these minimum wage workers are mothers, and 40% of them have family incomes below $25,000 a year. And nationally, working women in the United States are more than twice as likely as working men to have a low-wage job, and a working woman is at least twice as likely to have a low-wage job in all but 3 states and DC. And even in these jurisdictions, the share of working women in the low-wage workforce is at least 1.5 times that of many men. So we need to think when discussing this, what kind of an impact does that have on these kids who are growing up in families that are already earning so little? Additionally, low-wage jobs are increasing, and the share of poor children with a parent working full-time year-round has grown significantly over the last 20 years, up from 1/4 to nearly 1/3, again showing how kids are in these households that are stretched and where it's harder to earn enough for their parents to earn enough to make ends meet. Poor children are also negatively impacted by the lack of benefits that go along with many of these jobs. This creates a situation where parents who take time to care for their families may lose not only their wages but also their jobs. And poor quality jobs can be hazardous to families' well-being and can further perpetuate this poverty. And leading on to the next part of this presentation, many jobs lack paid sick days. Over 40 million Americans do not currently have access to paid sick days. And workers in low-wage jobs, the majority of whom are women, are even less likely to be able to earn paid sick days. More than half of working mothers do not even have a few paid sick days that they can use care for their sick children. And adults without paid sick days are 1.5 times more likely than adults who have paid sick days at work to report going to work with a contagious illness like the flu or virus, which also makes them more likely to infect others. Low wage and part-time workers are especially less likely to have paid sick days, evidencing how not having paid sick days can connect to poverty. And 82% of workers making $8.25 per hour or less don't have access to paid sick days, according to statistics. We need to ask ourselves, what does this mean to these kids? Again, a graph further showing how paid sick days policies and their effects on low-wage workers. And we also need to think about the kind of stress that paid sick days policies place on their caregivers. If caregivers have paid sick days, it can help them manage their caregiving responsibilities as well as managing the jobs that they need to support their families. There are currently 66 million adults who are unpaid caregivers for their family members or for their friends, and this number is growing. Having a paid sick days policy would help relieve a significant stress or burden on these caregivers, and it makes it harder for people in the workforce. Poverty rates from the 2013 census were particularly high for women who had their families, further showing the stress that this can cause. And many low-wage working parents receive no paid time off for them. And then for them, child care emergencies can be a major hardship. Parents who are able to take paid leave to care for their kids from school also report having better situations for their families. Sorry, I got a little sick on the note of paid sick days. A lack of paid sick days places stress on their families again. So women who can't earn paid sick time are forced to sacrifice their job security and ability to meet their family's needs when illness strikes. 1 in 5 women with children report that they or a family member have been fired or that they've been disciplined by an employer for taking time off to cope with an illness or to care for a sick child or a family member. They have to think about putting their jobs on the line when they think about this. And for the typical family without paid sick days, just 3.5 sick days without pay is equivalent to losing a month of groceries, which can be a major hardship. We just learned about the major issue of child hunger in this country. What working adult wants to place that burden on their kids? And for single-parent families, which are usually headed by women, the consequences are even more severe from this. And 42% of women have had the experience of being unable to take time off from work to care for a child. To care for their children, working families need good jobs because kids are healthier when their parents have paid sick days. And again, we talked about this already, that many risk their jobs if they stay at home to care for a sick child. Because children's health is incredibly important. Nationally, parents without paid sick days are more than twice as likely as parents with paid sick days to send a sick child to school or to daycare. Children inevitably become sick, whether we like to admit it or not, and they're best cared for by a parent or guardian, research shows. When children become seriously ill, a parent's care helps them recover more quickly. The mere presence of a parent when a child is sick in the hospital, research shows shortens the child's hospital stay by as much as 31%. Parents without paid sick days are more than twice as likely as parents with paid sick days to send a sick child to school or to daycare, which again is putting these kids at further risk of getting more sick and is also putting them at risk of getting their classmates sick. Access to paid sick days allows parents to get their kids the essential preventative care they need, so these kids are going to the doctor or staying at home to rest instead of going to school. And sick children have more trouble learning, and it is more difficult for teachers to educate them. We need to think about the educational gaps that can go with this, and about how important it is for all kids to be able to access educational opportunities. And if these kids can't access these opportunities, what does that mean for them? Children with chronic conditions are especially likely to fall behind academically. But what can we do? If there's momentum, though, regarding these measures, we see in this country that these are issues that need to be addressed. At the state level, there's momentum to pass paid sick days legislation building. And legislators and advocates are currently working on active campaigns in 20 states and cities around the country. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts last November, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts voted on a ballot initiative to have paid sick days. And then paid sick days issues are also coming up in legislatures around the states, and they're getting momentum. Also around the minimum wage, there are 4 states that voted to pass increases to the minimum wage in November. And there's also legislative action happening in Congress right now. There's the Healthy Families Act, which has lead sponsors Senator Patty Murray from Washington State, and Representative Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. The Healthy Families Act would allow workers and businesses with at least 15 employees to earn up to 7 days of job-protected paid sick day leave each year. Workers would earn 1 hour of paid sick time for every 30 hours worked. And people working at a business with fewer than 15 employees would be able to earn up to 7 job-protected days of unpaid sick leave annually. Additionally, there's momentum going to raise the minimum wage. In the last Congress, there was the Fair Minimum Wage Act and the Minimum Wage Fairness Act. However, the 2 lead sponsors of those bills are no longer in office. Now, new legislation needs to be introduced and is upcoming that will raise the minimum wage. You need to urge your members of Congress to support upcoming legislation that will raise the minimum wage to $12 by 2020 over a series of 5 gradual increases. It will also index the minimum wage to the median wage so that it can never fall so low again, and that it will change along with time, and it will also work to gradually eliminate the tipped sum minimum wage, which is even lower than the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour and needs to be addressed in order to think about poverty. And now I'm going to turn it over to learn about some taxes.
Thanks. So in this presentation, I'm going to speak about 2 of the most important poverty-reducing policies we currently have operating: the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. Next slide. So I know that taxes can be a yawner, and even this guy gets bored sometimes. And they're even difficult to understand. The Monopoly man still doesn't quite understand them. So he just issues a simple $200 transfer for pass and go. But trust me, the Earned Income and Child Tax Credits aren't rocket science. I'm going to cover what they are, why they're important, what the current political climate is, and what we're asking of Congress. So what are they? The tax code is incredibly complex, and there are many opportunities for deductions and kickbacks, very few of which are meaningful and available to working families. These 2 that I'm going to be talking about are really the most meaningful credits for Americans. So what's a tax credit anyways? A tax credit is an incentive that allows certain taxpayers to subtract the amount of that credit from the total they owe the government at the local or federal level. They encourage certain behaviors like investing or parenting, and unlike tax exemptions, which reduce the size of the total base income or property value, tax credits reduce the tax bills. Okay, so what's the Earned Income Tax Credit? Next slide. So in '75, President Ford's Tax Reduction Act came onto the scene, and the Earned Income Tax Credit has been extended multiple times since. It's the most progressive tax expenditure in the income tax code. The amount of the credit first increases as earnings increase. It reaches a plateau, and then falls as earnings increase. There's no credit provided to those making over $47,162. It incentivizes labor force participation of single people, as only those earning are able to receive it. And most importantly, for our conversation today, it reduces poverty in really significant ways, with children making up half of those lifted out of poverty. So what's the, next slide. So what's the Child Tax Credit? The Child Tax Credit was part of the Taxpayers Relief Act of '97. It increased to $1,000 as part of the Bush tax cuts in the early 2000s. Then in 2009, as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, they were improved to include tax-paying immigrants as well. The credit begins to phase out for singles earning an adjusted gross income of AGI of $75,000, for married couples, AGI of $110,000. It really provides meaningful amounts of money to millions of families. Excuse me. It's really often the security blanket that prevents folks from having their electricity turned off or their cars taken away for failing to make a payment on time. We've At Network, we've talked with a lot of people around the country, and just a few college students came in a couple of weeks ago from Mercyhurst University in Pennsylvania and were telling us about their stories of how these credits were essential for allowing them to, pay for school supplies for their children and allow them to get a little bit ahead on their student loan payments. It's really important that we support these credits, and I just can't overemphasize how crucial these are for millions of people. So why are they important? Our tax system was designed to create financial incentives for individuals and corporations to act in ways that are thought to strengthen our social fabric. However, as we know, these incentives are often structured for this guy and in a way that low-wage workers do not earn enough to access them in any substantial way. So the result is we have a corrupt system that perpetuates inequality by rewarding behavior that generates financial security for those who already have it, while excluding those who are working at low-wage jobs and need it most. In many countries, corruption is where people don't follow the law. In our country, corruption is built into the law. A just tax code should reward the efforts of low-income people to work and save. It also should strengthen our society by caring for people in need. So here's the political context of these tax credits. Both the Earned Income and Child Tax Credits were initially proposed, supported, and expanded by Republican lawmakers with broad bipartisan support. Economists across this political spectrum agree that the Earned Income Tax Credit has been one of the most effective anti-poverty programs we have. Together with the refundable child tax credit, it helps keep about 10 million Americans, including more than 5 million children, out of poverty. There's also consensus that making these programs permanent, as well as expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit, would increase labor force participation among low-skilled childless workers, increase earnings, and thus also marriage rates and stability within family structures, and help reduce crime and incarceration rates among the young. Currently, childless adults working at minimum wage receive little or nothing from the Earned Income Tax Credit because their earnings exceed the income limit for workers not raising minor children. So what are we asking for? We're asking two things. Since recent expansions of Earned Income and Child Tax Credit are set to expire in 2017, it's essential for all of us to make two concrete, clear asks. One, which you see in front of you. Expand and make permanent the Earned Income Tax Credit to childless, low-income workers and workers under the age of 25. And second, make the Child Tax Credit permanent. It's here. We know it works. Make it permanent. Why do we keep extending it? Let's just continue it. Call your members of Congress and tell them that if they're planning on giving away more to corporate interests, they have to give something to real people too. In 2013, there were 17,500 registered tax lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Corporations have armies of lobbyists. Working families have us. The folks on this call and a handful of partnering organizations that are speaking out for working families and children. It's up to us on this call and those folks that we talk to. So make those calls, talk to others, set up meetings with your representative through in-district offices. It's face-to-face interactions with elected leaders and their staff that research shows is the most effective way of changing people's minds on Capitol Hill. Thanks a lot.
So thank you all for bearing with us as we had some technical difficulties. We hope that this was a really valuable experience for you. We enjoyed you giving us your time. So we're going to take some questions and answers now. You can actually, on your screen, you can type in any kind of questions you might have, and we will respond. So if you have questions, go ahead and start typing those in now. Additionally, we'll make available a whole series of action alerts that you can take part in, that you individually can take part of, or it's things that you can share with your community from various different organizations. So we'll be able to get those to you shortly. So why don't we go ahead with questions and answers.
Yeah, this is a question. Our first question is, in what ways can teens and children help other teens and children beyond food drives and other situations like that?
mean, I think a really quick initial response is engage in advocacy. You know, we often talk about charity, and that's a really important first step. That's meeting the direct need of somebody, and you can sort of see that in the value that has in someone's life immediately. But we're talking about systems here, and systems that aren't working. So how do we fix systems? We need to do it through advocacy, through talking to your elected officials, through engaging in public demonstrations. I know a couple others around the table want to talk about that as well.
I was going to say, the other thing that you can do is, because I know a lot of teens who want to be active on these issues, you're not able to vote, but your parents vote. And so if you get educated about it, you talk about it around the dinner table, you talk about it with your parents, you can kind of be that information for your parents to kind of consume that, and they're able to take action through their vote.
And the last thing that I'd add is a few months ago, a group of middle schoolers from a small town in Pennsylvania went to Capitol Hill and talked with a representative about climate change. Now, I know we're not talking about climate change specifically, but as we know, that's an issue that affects child poverty in many ways around the world and here in the United States. They were very effective in their ask. They told their personal stories about having asthma. They said how they weren't able to play their soccer games as well, and how they thought it was really unfair that their parents' generation, their grandparents' generation, created a climate that was going to damage their health and their children's health, and they thought it wasn't fair. And they were upset, and they went into the office, and they talked with the representative, and they said, we want you to admit that climate change exists and it's affecting our communities. And how do we know you're going to do this? And they really held his feet to the fire, and they stayed in his office, and they said, what are you going to do about it? And by the end of the visit, he agreed to put out a statement saying that climate change exists, and sort of getting the ball rolling in that direction. So the point is this. Personal stories, connecting your own personal experience, how it affects you to a specific policy, and then showing up in person, whether it's in district office right around the corner or coming to Washington, it does make a difference. And there are tangible examples time after time where people do this, and when it's kids in the room, in some ways it matters more, because it's hard to turn a 7-year-old child away who has asthma and is upset that they can't play their soccer game on Saturdays.
Definitely. I want to echo everything that's being said. Also, we as the faith community have a really unique voice to play too. We can bring in a more moral calling to a certain extent, and that's also been really effective. And for young people, lots of ways to get involved. Super exciting that young people want to address these issues. So thanks for that question. And then our next question is, what do opponents of the EITC and CTC cite as the reasons for their opposition? So that's the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit.
So there are opponents to the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. There are not many. The real challenge with the earned income tax credit and child tax credit is more about sort of complacency and just extending it again and extending it again. We want to make them permanent. So the real challenge isn't the opposition. There's a lot of support behind them. It's more of sort of just it's not that important, and the people who benefit from these credits, generally speaking, aren't donating in big numbers to campaigns, right? And we know how the political system has evolved over the last 20 years, and so that's been something that allows for this to become part of a set of policies that are on the back burner.
Great. So our next question, it sounds like in the media is focused on SNAP and food stamp cuts. So should advocates and activists be focusing on this as well? So why don't we leave that one to Christine if she's still on the phone?
Yep, I'm still here. That certainly is a big focus because it is one of the bigger programs out there and one that we need to be aware of. But I think everything that we talked about today is important. The way to end hunger isn't just through end poverty, isn't just through a program like SNAP or food stamps. Kind of relating to the last question, at Bread we've done a little mini analysis that shows that for every one grocery bag of private charity, there's 19 times more food distributed through our federal nutrition program. So those are really important, but they're not a long-term solution to ending hunger and poverty. It's things like wages and housing and all of that are important. So I think sharing stories of the importance of all of these programs and just the fact that there are still struggling families out there, that the recovery isn't reaching everyone is what's really important. And when Congress has specific proposals on the table, like, we need to stand up and push back, but we also need to be speaking to them on a regular basis and have good relationships with members of Congress so that they know how important these issues are year-round, not just when they decide that they want to cut programs we care about.
Thanks, Christine. So another question, does advocacy work? Do phone calls and letters really make a difference? Why don't we open that one up? I think the quick answer is, from what I've seen, is yes. I think the work we're engaged in is long-term work. I don't think any of us expect to see meaningful change for social justice happen overnight. You look at all the great movements for social justice, and they've all taken a lot of time, taken a lot of different characters, and at moments they were slower. Sometimes they moved a little bit quicker. So I think as advocates, and we're all advocates here in the room and on the phone, you're all advocates too. I think it takes patience. I think it takes trust as well. We're people of faith. That means we ought to have faith. Faith that what we're standing for is important, that ultimately is going to win out. And I think history has shown that it will win out. But speaking more practically, whether a representative is going to vote on something because you make a phone call or not, I can't say. But that congressional staffer certainly is going to know the issue better and certainly has to take into account what you're saying. And the more voices that are bugging that office, the more that issue is in the daily life of that office. And I think that's only a good thing. I'll let others respond.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Matt said. And in addition, even if your elected official agrees with you, it's still important for you to thank them, let them know that you appreciate that they're acting. And and even if you know that they might be opposed to something you're saying, it's still important too to let your voice be heard. And this is a really exciting opportunity that all of y'all have to advocate for issues that you care about. And it really, really, really does make a difference.
I think when taking a look at the history of the important social changes in the United States, you see a build-up. So there's a period of time where the country is being educated on an issue, and it takes planning, it takes strategy, but really what it starts with is conversation. So it starts with conversations you are having, like we were saying earlier, at the dinner table with your family, with your friends. And it sounds corny, and people say, oh, just have dinner table conversations. But if you really think about it, you're most effective, and you can influence those most who live around you more than any other people. So start there, and understand that it's through that buildup of education that allows for those windows to come into focus. And when two windows come into focus, that's when you can punch through the policy. That's when all that education, all those conversations that you had previously really come into play, and you can push forward legislation through Congress. So understand that, while we want, like Matt was saying, a lot of these policies to be enacted right away, we understand that it's going to take time to educate people about what's going on. The importance, for example, of having free breakfast at public schools for those folks who don't have breakfast at home. That has taken years for that to come to fruition. People are starting to understand that now, the importance of that, and hopefully one day, we will have a policy that reflects those realities.
Well, I know we're approaching last couple minutes here, so I just want to thank you all again. And a couple logistical details. So a number of people have asked questions about whether this presentation will be available. It will be. It'll be up on the website tomorrow at the latest. We're also going to we'll probably add another slide or two with specific links to specific action alerts that you can use, that you can take action with. So you can expect to see those tomorrow along with the recording. So with that, I just want to thank you for taking part. I want to thank our panelists once more, and have a great afternoon.